Genocide targeting the vulnerable minorities in Germany didn't happen overnight, and yet there are key moments where things shifted drastically for the worse. The racist policies of the Nazis were initially resisted by many Germans. For example, the initial boycott of Jewish businesses was simply ignored by many loyal customers in the cities. Gradually, however, the system of terror and the religious-like fervor produced by the Nazi propaganda machine would establish racism as law. And these laws targeted the vulnerable minorities inside and outside of Germany. So this experience of ever more restricting confinement is what Victor Klemperer documented in his diary and later worked into the 1957 study of the Nazi language as a way of thinking that continued to persist after the war. A professor of Romance languages at the Technical University in Dresden, he was adeptly attuned to notice the changes in language and the strategies used by the fledgling Nazis to predict where their rhetoric would lead. It was his work on language, and in particular the concepts the Nazis were flooding the media with, such as the propaganda that promoted the community, the folk, over the individual, the emulation and promotion of heroic death, that's the sacrifice of the individual for the organism as community, and the demand that followers be fanatic, develop an irrational loyalty and obedience towards the leadership. Totalitarian movements like the Nazis always seek to create a religious experience for their supporters, something that Klemperer notices very quickly in their speeches. Klemperer's diaries were first published in 1995, and it took a tremendous effort to keep them intact and hidden during the Nazi period. It was especially after losing his ability to continue his research and his access to the library at the university that the diary became something that sustained him, and he found incredibly necessary to observe and note the little things to survive. The lesson here is that history is experienced by the individual through the little things, not just the impactful moments, which may not seem that impactful at the moment for the individual. Klemperer had a chance to emigrate, like his brother Georg did to America, but he gives us insight into why many German Jews did not choose to leave Germany. This is where his life was. It was where he had made his home with his wife, his close circle of friends, where he made the name for himself as a respected professor. Germany is the land he fought for, grew up in, and it is the land he loved. He thinks about the life he could have outside of Germany, and he didn't see himself ever being able to attain a similar quality of life abroad. This is the quintessential question for refugees. And in his very first entries, we can see that he is depressed, disgraced, and disappointed. His depression comes from seeing the way in which people are frightened, not trying to face the fact that these thugs have taken over the government and are attempting to establish their authority through open intimidation. What until the election on March 5th I had called terror was a mild prelude, a procession of torchbearers, swastika flag bearers on the balconies and loudspeakers, the unctuous bawling, true bawling of a priest. Disgraced to know that his Germany, the land of high culture and luminaries of literature, art, film, philosophy, and science, that so many people of this nation he loved had clearly aligned themselves with men who promoted such vile ideas, who cavorted with such hatred in their eyes, and whose repugnant words and deeds left this idea and his hopes for Germany tarnished and stained. He was disappointed in all of those who sat idly by and watched, who did nothing, or even worse, participated, those who condescended and who supported the new government. I felt shame more than fear, shame for Germany. I have always felt German in a toy shop, a children's ball with the swastika. Most German Jews were very well integrated into society. Klemperer had converted in 1912 to Protestantism and had served in the military and was even decorated in World War I. And he was married to what the Nazis would consider an Aryan woman. So he felt German, and this is perhaps why he never considered emigrating as well. His identity was really founded in German culture. What saved his life? So he credits his partnership with his wife, Eva. She helped him recover from several breakdowns, just as he had done for her, and she also aided him with the practical advice that had him removing his Jewish star and mingling in with the refugees on their way to the West under new assumed identities. It was on one fateful day on February 22nd that he was called for his last task in Dresden before his own deportation, and that was to hand-deliver the letters of deportation to the very last Jews who were still living in Dresden. It's important to mention that deportations varied. Sometimes they happened under the cloak of darkness, whereupon the next day, neighbors would notice that entire buildings were emptied out of all life. Other deportations were conducted very orderly. Some deportations happened in broad daylight, with systematic humiliation beginning with at the very beginning. Deportees stripped their clothing and then got rid of their footwear, and they were separated. This was a way to separate them from other Germans, to make them wear oversized clogs that forced them to stumble and walk imbalanced, made them seem comical. This made it easier for oppressors to treat them as something separate, or some people separate, as less, as prisoners. Back to Klemperer. On his route that day, a woman he met prophetically announced that only a bombing would save them now. And that is exactly what happened later that very day. Klemperer had to narrowly escape becoming a casualty of the Dresden firebombing that would kill around 25,000 people, many of them refugees and civilians, in the Old Town district. In this chaos, he scrambled to find Eva, and after rejoining her, they were able to escape under these new assumed identities towards the west. While life in the camps was much worse, Klemperer documents for us what he calls death by 1,000 gnat bites. As he experiences the continual invasion and restriction of his private life by laws of codified humiliation and overt brutality that the Nazis had towards German Jews, the Nazis would eventually pass over 2,000 anti-Semitic laws. Among those laws that impacted Klemperer the most were those that included the restriction and dwindling down of his students, the loss of his professorship, his colleagues ignoring him thereafter, the loss of his telephone, the invalidation of his driver's license, his reduction of food rations, the confiscation of his typewriter, the restriction from using the university library that ended his research, the forcing upon him of a new name, Israel Victor Klemperer. He was forced out of his home, but still had to pay taxes on it and pay for repairs. He had to move from one Judenhaus to another, encountering ever more restrictive and smaller living spaces. Other laws were incredibly sadistic, such as the enforced euthanasia of pets of Jews that had doomed the Klemperer's tomcat named Musha. So he began to suffer from anxiety and panic attacks, and he resorted for the first time in his life to scavenging. He received sympathy from some Germans and spits and curses from others. His experience was one that was constructed by the Nazi state police and leadership to terrorize and harass Jews into coercing them to emigrate, until their strategy then shifted towards all-out genocide. Klemperer's experience provides us insight into what it was like to live in Germany under the Nazi regime, and his writing is invaluable to us today because it helps us understand the dangerous trajectory of those who support legalized discrimination, how it is experienced, and hopefully it will move us to reject those laws and those lawmakers that would eliminate those voices from public life. In this lecture, we looked at the everyday, ever more constricting persecution experienced firsthand in Victor Klemperer's diaries. It was a death by 1,000 gnat bites. As a prelude to deportation, Klemperer was lucky enough to stay out of the camps like Auschwitz, where our next reading, Primo Levi, will deliver a harrowing reflection on the system of destruction and dehumanization at Buna-Monowitz, as one of the three main camps that we'll examine, along with more than 40 subcamps that made up the most notorious of the labor and death camps at Auschwitz.